Coercive control in child custody. What if the biggest mistake we are making in some high conflict custody cases is calling them high conflict at all? What if that appears to be two parents who cannot get along is actually one parent attempting to maintain power and control over the other parent, and eventually over the children themselves? And what happens when the child who once loved both parents begins rejecting one? What happens when that child begins repeating adult accusations? When affection disappears, when fear suddenly appears, when the child becomes hypervigilant about what they say, when a child who once ran into a parent's arms suddenly says, "I don't want to see you anymore," do we simply accept that statement at face value? Do we automatically conclude that the rejected parent caused it? Or do we investigate what happened to this child over time? Because coercive control does not necessarily end when parents separate. Actually, it usually intensifies by the abusive parent. Sometimes separation simply changes the tactics, and sometimes the children become one of the most powerful means through which that control continues and worsens often. Today we're going to talk about what research tells us about coercive control, how coercive controllers / abusers can weaponize children during custody disputes, how children themselves can become direct targets of coercive control, and why understanding the timeline of change may be critical to understanding what happened to a child. Part 1, stop looking only for incidents. For decades, domestic violence was often understood primarily through individual incidents. Was someone hit? Was there an injury? Was there a threat? Were the police called? Those questions matter, but coercive control requires us to widen the lens. Evan Stark's work helped establish an understanding of domestic abuse as something broader than isolated physical assaults. It can involve an ongoing pattern of domination that restricts another person's autonomy and liberty. Kudos to Dr. Evan Stark, R.I.P. his soul. He single-handedly read my entire manuscript of Nightmare on Hostage Hills. It was very long, almost 700 pages, and it was his really encouragement, his charge to me to go ahead and publish it, because he said it's a true story. It's a child custody, white-collar crime case that illustrates the abuse dynamics, the coercive control dynamics that he and many others have been researching for over 50 years. And he said, "You have to publish this because it's illustrating exactly what we're trying to reveal to the world to protect victims and children from this hideous coercive control and domestic violence in IPV." Continuing, the pattern may include intimidation, isolation, monitoring, degradation, threats, financial control, micro-regulation, which I like to call suffocating control, stalking, manipulation, deprivation, punishment, surveillance, and the strategic creation of fear, like putting the devil on a parent's phone instead of that parent being mom or dad. The significance is often not found in one incident. It is found in the cumulative pattern. That is extremely important in family court, because when we separate each incident from the others, every incident can appear explainable. One missed phone call, one schedule change, one medical appointment, one allegation, one canceled visit, one child suddenly refusing contact, one therapist change, one school change, one frightening statement from a child, one court filing. Individually, perhaps none of this explains the case, but put them into chronological order, and sometimes something entirely different becomes visible. Control has a timeline. Part 2, high conflict is not the same as coercive control. This distinction matters enormously, guys. The damage that can be perpetrated upon victims and children, the failure to assess and make this distinction early on causes massive damage. That's why we're uniting in my school group to learn, support one another, and move forward as warriors for children. And so, high conflict generally suggests two people repeatedly participating in destructive conflict. Both may escalate, both may communicate badly, both may contribute to the instability. Coercive control is very different. The fundamental issue is not simply conflict. It is power and control. One person may be attempting to restrict the autonomy, choices, relationships, resources, movement, or psychological freedom of another. That means we should stop asking only, why can't these parents get along? And begin asking, is someone attempting to dominate someone else? And in custody cases, there's another question. Is that control now operating through the children? Yes, you guys, they can become agents of the abuser's abuse. Unconsciously, of course, but they've adapted, right, to that environment. Part 3, separation does not necessarily end the abuse. As I've stated earlier in my other videos, post-separation abuse is the most riskiest time. That's when we see the homicides, suicides. That's when we have to be especially observant and astute and enact the laws that protect the kids and the mother. If the mother's a loving, safe parent, which she normally is, parents are frequently told, just leave, get divorced, use a parenting app, stop engaging. Those interventions can be appropriate, but separation does not necessarily terminate coercive control. It can remove some methods of control while creating opportunities for others. The former partner may no longer control what happens inside the marital home, but now there may be custody exchanges, parenting schedules, child support, medical decisions, school decisions, therapy, extracurricular activities, communication applications, attorneys, evaluators, GALs, custody experts, and repeated court proceedings. The arena has changed. The underlying struggle for control most likely has not. In fact, it intensifies. Research on post-separation abuse describes psychological, economic, legal, and system-level tactics, as well as the weaponization of children. That means professionals cannot assume they're divorced or the domestic violence is over. No, that's a myth. Sometimes the post-separation period requires even greater vigilance. Not just sometimes, most oftentimes. Part 4, the child can become the weapon. This is one of the most important concepts in this training. A coercive controlling parent can potentially discover that the most effective way to continue hurting or controlling the former partner is through something that parent deeply values, their child. Research literature on post-separation abuse specifically identifies the use of children as a tactic of abuse, using children to obtain information about the other parent, using the child to create forced contact, threatening to take the child, interfering with medical treatment, neglecting children's needs in ways that cause distress to the other parent, using technology associated with the child to surveil or harass the former partner, using custody proceedings themselves as a vehicle for continued control, and using children psychologically against the other parent. The child can therefore become simultaneously the messenger, the source of information, the leverage, the justification for continued contact, the object being fought over, and eventually the target of coercive control themselves. Part 5, undermining the other parent. I experienced that. It is monstrous how that process unfolds. Bancroft, Silverman, and Ritchie's The Batterer as Parent has long addressed the impact of battering behavior on family functioning. Their framework specifically considers the undermining of the other parent's authority, damage to the parent-child relationship, the use of children as weapons, post-separation parenting, and tactics used in custody and visitation disputes. Why is undermining so powerful? Because children depend on adults to construct reality. Imagine repeatedly communicating to a child, "Mom doesn't care about you. Dad abandoned us. Your mother's dangerous. Your father is crazy. Mom chose her boyfriend over you. Dad doesn't pay for anything. Your mother is trying to take you away. Your father is trying to destroy our family." One statement may not fundamentally alter a child's relationship, but coercive control is about patterns. Imagine the message being reinforced repeatedly for months, for years. Now combine it with restriction of contact, interrogation after visits, reward for rejection, withdrawal when the child expresses affection toward the other parent, adult court information, repeated allegations, fear, loyalty pressure, and dependence upon the controlling parent. We now have something very different from a single disparaging remark. Part 6, the child becomes a direct target. This is where Emma Catt's research becomes especially important. She's a rock star in this field. Children are not merely witnesses to coercive control between adults. Children themselves can become direct victims. Katz and colleagues examined children's experiences of coercive control after parental separation and described experiences involving violence, threats, intimidation, stalking, monitoring, emotional abuse, manipulation, and periods of apparently caring or indulgent behavior. Children describe lives characterized by confusion, fear, constraint, and entrapment. That changes the clinical question. Instead of asking only, what did the child witness? We need to ask, what happened directly to this child? Part 7, how a child's world can become smaller. Imagine being a child who learns, I can talk about Dad, but Mom gets upset. I can love Mom, but Dad becomes withdrawn. I can tell Dad what happened at Mom's, but I cannot tell Mom what happened at Dad's. If I refuse the visit, one parent comforts me. If I enjoy the visit, that parent becomes unhappy. If I repeat certain accusations, adults pay attention. If I question those accusations, someone I depend upon becomes distressed. The child's psychological world can progressively narrow. This does not require somebody sitting the child down and saying, I'm going to brainwash you. Human adaptation is much more complicated. Children learn from consequences. They learn what brings safety. They learn what creates tension. They learn which emotions are allowed. They learn which relationships are safe to discuss. They learn what story maintains connection with the parent upon whom they depend. Part 8, the 2 fears. I talked about this in an earlier video. This connects directly with the framework I teach parents about 2 different kinds of fear. Fear number 1, fear of harm. A child may legitimately fear a parent because something frightening, abusive, neglectful, or unsafe actually occurred. That possibility must always be assessed. We never assume that a child's rejection is manufactured. We investigate. Fear number 2, fear of loss. But another kind of fear can develop. The child may fear losing the approval, affection, emotional stability, or connection of the parent upon whom they depend. The child may begin organizing their behavior around preserving that attachment. This is why a child can appear extraordinarily certain. Compliance does not always look frightened. Sometimes adaptation looks confident. Sometimes it sounds rehearsed. Sometimes it looks like loyalty. Sometimes the child appears completely aligned with one parent, and sometimes the child may sincerely believe the narrative they have adopted. That is why we must resist simplistic conclusions. Part 9, From Pressure to Adaptation. Consider this possible regression. Stage 1, normal attachment. I love mom, I love dad. The child has permission to maintain both relationships. Stage 2, exposure. The child begins receiving negative information about one parent. Stage 3, emotional consequences. The child stops discussing positive experiences. The child notices that expressing affection toward that parent creates discomfort. Stage 4, self-censorship. The child stops discussing positive experiences. Stage 5, alignment. The child increasingly adopts one parent's interpretation of events. Step 6, rejection. The child begins resisting communication or parenting time. Stage 7, consolidation. The child's new narrative becomes psychologically organized and may continue for an extended period. This is not a diagnostic formula, but when dramatic relationship changes occur, professionals should investigate how the change developed rather than beginning at the end of the story. Part 10, why the child said it is not the end of the assessment. Children's voices do matter. Children should be heard, but listening to children does not mean abandoning clinical assessment. Suppose a 12-year-old says, I haven't wanted my mother for years. The next question should not automatically be, then why are we forcing this relationship? The assessment might need to establish, what was this relationship like when the child was 6, 7, 8? When did rejection begin? Was there a precipitating event? What was happening in the family? What did the child say at the time? What happened to parenting time? Did the child's language change? Did communication change? Were there substantiated safety concerns? Were allegations corroborated? Was the child exposed to adult information? Were communications monitored? Was contact interrupted? Did professionals observe the earlier relationship? Start before the change. Part 11, establish the child's baseline. This is one of the most useful things a protective parent can document, and I have documentation strategy in school community for you guys. Don't begin the story when the child rejected you. Begin before anything changed. Document the baseline. What was your child's typical behavior? How did they greet you? Did they seek your affection? Did they call spontaneously? What were exchanges like? Did they ask when they would see you again? How did they speak about the other parent? Were they comfortable loving both parents? What was their physical functioning? Sleep, stomach aches, headaches, school, activities, friendships, anxiety. Then establish the first observable change. Part 12, create the timeline. Instead of, my ex brainwashed our child, document, March 3rd, child hugged me at exchange and asked when she would return. March 18th, parenting time occurred normally. April 2nd, first canceled weekend. April 10th, child said, Dad says you're taking him back to court. April 17th, child became tearful before the exchange. April 24th, parenting time canceled. May 1st, the child said, the judge knows what you did. May 8th, child refused scheduled call. May 22nd, child stated, I don't feel safe with you. Now we have something a professional can evaluate, not brainwashing, but baseline to event to change, additional event, further change. That is far more useful. Part 13, tactics professionals should know to look for. And parents, you're going to have to help them with correct documentation because they're busy, because they don't understand this stuff very well yet. That's why I'm doing this work. That's why we're uniting in Parenting Through Family Court School Group. Tactics professionals should know what to look for. When evaluating possible coercive control involving children, consider whether evidence supports patterns involving 1. Isolation, restricting the child's access to the other parent, relatives, friends, or other sources of support. 2. Surveillance, monitoring phone calls, messages, locations, conversations. 3. Interrogation, questioning children extensively after parenting time. 4. Information control, controlling what the child is permitted to know about the other parent. 5. Narrative control, repeatedly providing adult interpretations of divorce, abuse allegations, court proceedings, or the other parent's motives. 6. Loyalty tests, creating situations in which affection toward one parent appears disloyal to the other. Reward and punishment, rewarding alignment or rejection while responding negatively to affection toward the targeted parent. 8. Parentification, recruiting the child as confident. I saw that in our case. Recruiting the child as confident protector, messenger, or emotional caretaker. 9. Fear induction, creating or magnifying fear concerning the other parent, like putting the devil in place of mom on somebody's phone, on a child's phone. Creating or magnifying fear concerning the other parent without adequate factual foundation. 10. Communication restriction, interrupting calls, messages, or other normal contact. You'll often see phone calls that are supposed to be confidential between the children and the exiled parent. It's supposed to be confidential. Often the coercive controller is lurking either on the other line or in the room somehow. 11. Medical or therapeutic control, interfering with healthcare, medication, or treatment, or using professionals as part of the conflict. Lundy Bancroft talks about that in The Batterer's Parent. They often get absorbed by these narcissist abusers into their spells. 12. Educational control, restricting school information, changing schools, or using educational decisions as leverage. 13. Legal abuse, using repetitive or retaliatory litigation, financial. For example, in my previous video with the IM that came in that said, settle the assets, when I wanted to spend time with our children. Using repetitive or retaliatory litigation as part of a broader pattern of control. 14. Custody as leverage, using access to the child primarily to maintain power or retaliate against the former partner, rather than support the child's relationship needs. 15. Public persona management, appearing exceptionally concerned, accommodating, or victimized publicly while coercive behavior occurs behind closed doors. None of these individual behaviors automatically proves coercive control. Pattern, context, purpose, effect, and corroborating evidence matter. Part 14. Caring can coexist with control. This is another reason these cases can be so difficult. Katz's research found that coercively controlling behavior could be interwoven with behavior that appears caring, concerned, or indulgent. That matters. A controlling parent does not have to appear cruel every minute. They might buy gifts, plan vacations, attend every sporting event, volunteer at school, present themselves exceptionally well to professionals, tell everyone how desperately they want to protect their child. None of those behaviors independently prove abuse, but neither does seemingly positive behavior rule out coercive control. Assessment must examine the whole pattern. You're getting it. Very good. Part 15, the child may appear to choose the controller. This is perhaps one of the hardest concepts for protective parents to understand, and others. A child's alignment does not necessarily tell us everything about the relational process that produced it. Children adapt to their environments. They depend on caregivers for attachment, belonging, and emotional survival. If maintaining one relationship appears to require suppressing another, the child may adapt. Eventually, the child may no longer experience the behavior as compliance. The belief can feel completely authentic. This is why I prefer professional language such as coercive influence, psychological maltreatment, attachment disruption, relationship interference, fear conditioning, loyalty conflict, constraint and entrapment, and coercive control, rather than relying exclusively on the phrase mind control or brainwashing. Mind control may describe how terrifying this feels to parents, but our professional task, and for parents in presenting in court, is to identify observable mechanisms. Part 16, this is the heartbreak. This can last for years. Parents frequently ask, how can my child believe this? Because human beings adapt. And children are especially dependent upon their relational environments. When an environment remains consistent for years, adaptation can become deeply entrenched. The child may construe memories and interpretations around the dominant narrative. Relationships can deteriorate. Contact can disappear. Years may pass. And the longer the separation continues, the more the absence itself can appear to validate the story. See, mom isn't part of my life. But that still doesn't tell us why the relationship disappeared. Chronology matters. Part 17, research is telling us to take this seriously. A systematic review examining 51 studies found that interparental coercive control was associated with significant consequences across parenting, family relationships, children's psychological functioning, and development. The literature included findings involving poorer family functioning, harsh parenting, child abuse, strained parent-child relationships, children used as tools or co-victims, internalizing and externalizing problems, social emotional difficulties, and physical health consequences. Another review examining 48 studies from the United States and Canada specifically identified weaponizing children among post-separation abuse tactics. This is not simply a social media concept. This is an emerging empirical literature that deserves serious professional attention. Part 18, the law is beginning to recognize the pattern. There's also an important legal development. Finally, after 50 years or so, coercive control has entered American statutory law. But parents need to understand this accurately. Different states define and address coercive control very differently. For example, California's Domestic Violence Prevention Act recognizes coercive control within conduct that can constitute disturbing another person's peace and defines it as a pattern interfering with free will and personal liberty. Connecticut expressly includes coercive control within its definition of DV. Massachusetts added coercive control to its definition of abuse in 2024. Other jurisdictions have adopted their own approaches, and some conduct occurring within a coercive control pattern may separately violate criminal statutes. For example, stalking, assault, threats, harassment, or other offenses depending upon the jurisdiction and facts. So don't go into court saying coercive control is a crime everywhere. It isn't yet. Instead, coercive control is increasingly recognized in domestic violence law, but its definition, civil remedies, custody implications, and criminal consequences vary by jurisdiction. That is accurate and powerful. Part 19, don't diagnose from a label. This brings me to one of my most important cautions. Do not walk into a custody evaluation saying, my narcissist ex brainwashed my child. You may know exactly what you mean, but the professional needs evidence. Instead, describe behavior. My daughter previously called me every evening. Beginning in March, calls were reduced. Between March and June, 14 scheduled calls did not occur. On April 17th, she began repeating information about our litigation that I had never discussed with her. That is evidence a professional can investigate. Part 20, differential assessment. We also have to protect against the opposite mistake. Not every child who rejects a parent has been coercively controlled. A child may resist contact because of actual abuse, neglect, frightening parenting, substance abuse, DV, poor attachment, developmental factors, ordinary parent-child conflict, parent's own behavior, or a combination of factors. That is why competent assessment requires competing hypotheses. Hypothesis 1, the child is legitimately afraid because of the rejected parent's behavior. Hypothesis 2, the child is being subjected to coercive influence or relationship interference. Hypothesis 3, both are occurring. Hypothesis 4, other developmental or family system factors better explain the behavior. Assessment, not ideology, should determine the conclusion. Part 21, what I want parents to do. If you believe something is happening to your child, don't diagnose, document. Don't interrogate your child. Listen. Don't counterattack the other parent through your child. Give your child emotional permission to love both parents. Don't make your child prove what happened. Record what you personally observe. Don't document only the bad events. Establish the baseline. Then document change over time. And preserve contemporaneous evidence, texts, emails, parenting app communications, school records, medical records, therapy records where legally accessible, court orders, parenting schedules, and your contemporaneous factual notes. Part 22, what I want professionals to ask. When a child's relationship with a parent changes dramatically, please don't begin your assessment with that rejection. Go backward. Ask, what was this relationship like before? When did it change? What happened around that time? What information was this child exposed to? Who controlled access to communication? Were there legitimate safety concerns? What evidence contradicts them? Was the child being asked to carry adult information? Were relationships being restricted? Was the child's behavior reinforced into one direction? Was there monitoring, intimidation, or fear? Was the child free to love both parents? And perhaps most importantly, what explanation best accounts for the entire chronology? In conclusion, coercive control is not simply about a person being controlling. It is about a pattern that can progressively restrict another person's autonomy. And after separation, that pattern may change form. The child may become the messenger, the leverage, the surveillance mechanism, the justification, the battleground. So sad. And sometimes the child becomes the direct target. When that happens, we cannot reduce the case to two parents who hate each other. We cannot automatically assume the child made a choice, and we cannot automatically assume coercive control either. We investigate. We establish the baseline. We construct the baseline. We examine behavior. We corroborate evidence. We test competing explanations. And we ask whether this child has been able to maintain relationships, thoughts, emotions, and attachments without intimidation, pressure, punishment, intimidation, manipulation, or coercion. Because children deserve more than adults who simply listen to the final statement, I don't want my mother, or I don't want my father. They deserve the professionals willing to ask, how did this child get here? And that question can change everything. So if you're navigating family court with a controlling partner or narcissistic, high conflict former partner, and you're trying to understand what's happening to your child, you do not have to figure this all out on your own. You don't have to figure out all the patterns on your own. We have a lot of support. I have trainings, resources, skills, education, everything in my Parenting Through Family Court school group, and it's still free for the time being. Inside my Parenting Through Family Court community, I'm teaching parents how to recognize concerning patterns, document observable behavior, organize evidence, communicate with professionals, support children without putting them in the middle, and prepare more effectively for the family court process. You'll find additional trainings, resources, Q&A, support, and practical tools designed specifically for you guys, for parents navigating these difficult custody dynamics. Join Parenting Through Family Court school group and start turning chaos into a clear, factual pattern. It's all for the kids. We keep them first. Bless you. Stay tuned. Go into my classroom, browse around. I have free trainings in there, paid trainings in there, and pick up Nightmare and Hostage Chills. If you're a reader, you'll read an entire case where this coercive control just wrapped like a spider web around everyone involved, causing immense harm and damage to children. And that's why I'm doing this, to stop all of this and to help you guys. So bless you, love you, see you inside my school group. Bye.